speaking only for myself, but I'm guessing the whole board would want the benefit of your best thinking on that, because as, you know, now, I think it's the case that a 2% return, if it's outstanding relative performance, could earn a full bonus, and a 15% return could return nothing.
Yep.
And that doesn't seem to be
Mr.
where we
Chairman,
want to guide our team.
Mr. Underman raises a really big question, which we wouldn't attempt to answer right now, but it's full of good opportunity, because what those people who, our clients who have the annual 8%, they buy houses, and lots of houses, and they buy lots of real estate thinking that might do it, and they get active in managing companies. And that carries a bunch of risk too. And so I think Mr. Chairman, one of your members has raised a good question, but that was not the subject of this study.
Yeah, so it's an extraordinary question with huge implications that would ripple throughout the entire organization, from investment strategies, decisions, compensation, et cetera. But I do think it's worthy of discussion. It would be something of that magnitude would actually probably be best put on a work plan for the 15-16 school calendar year or fiscal year, the 15-16 fiscal year for this committee, to actually look into the pros and cons of making such a decision, and an analysis of other funds that have made the decision or acting under that set of scenarios relative toward versus absolute returns, and basing incentives based on that, and what that would mean. That's a big question, and I think it's one that's certainly worthy of a compensation committee to evaluate and look at, but it's one that it's going to require significant time and research. So we'll put it as an early placeholder for the committee for work plans July 1st, 15, 16, if that's okay with the committee. Unless you want to stay through the night.
And one further refinement on that?
Yes.
When we look at total fund objectives, since the largest portion of our fund is indexed, what are we saying there? Are we saying as to that portion that would be valued as to how well we track the index, or is that to be measured on return objectives? Or are we saying that part is just carved out of the total fund?
How do you do the calculations, Peter? Did it on?
So it would have been just on the relative to the index, or the roll-up of the different asset classes. That's how this analysis was performed.
The reason I ask is for equity, we carve the index portion out and have a separate.
And I think that's a decision you could make here. Clearly, having a big weighting attached to the index is going to make it harder to achieve, and that's why you've historically carved it out. So again, we assumed that those aspects would carry on the way they are. But you still have, what you've got are targets within a similar framework being adjusted based on the expert evidence you've got from other consultants saying that the returns are not as achievable as they were a decade ago.
Okay. I think I get it.
I would suggest that question get probed a little bit more in depth going forward, relative to the index and carving out. And
carve out the index
yeah,
and
that's
look at it
again something I think we
relative
need a
to-
little bit more feedback on concretely with some statistics.
I think it's a
Make
good
sure
question,
we're-
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, it's a very
and
good question.
We'll address it.
Thank you very much. So with that, yeah, Mr. Rosensteel.
So, do you have a database of how the performance of different funds differs by the incentives that were set for their investment staff?
I don't believe anybody does. We're working with NCPRS, and we talked to Cassandra this morning about getting that database. So people have aspects of it, but they haven't tied. So you can get the data of what people get paid, you can get the data of how they perform, but there's details, like Mr. Unterman raised, that you need to understand to get that. So we're hoping to launch that study and make sure it happens, but it's not publicly available or secretly available to our knowledge.
I think one of our biggest risks is on the downside, and I, in particular, was wondering if there's, I mean, nobody was getting their investment objective during the downturn, but but those who were being measured by an absolute return rather than a relative return to an index, were they taking more risks so that in fact in the downturn they lost more?
And I only have anecdotal information from agencies that are public, like the Ontario Owners Association, and they seem to do pretty well in those down periods, but it's anecdotal. So I think it would be unfair for you as a committee to, without the study that we're proposing to do the next year, which we'll gladly share with you, I think that it's the right question. And it's one that's not, and
I would
it's,
just need the
and it's one
data.
that, I mean, I think it's the right question for compensation in general, irrespective of your industry. If you pay CEOs according to annual returns or beating the marketplace, which one behaves the best? And I don't think it is answered. But I think what we can give you is, in a few months, we'll give you a sample space. You know it won't be perfect, but you'll be able to say, how do we play within that and how do we feel about it? But I think Mr. Chairman, I think it's the correct question.
Very good. So with that, we'll transition to the second part of your presentation and/or comments. I think it was Mr. Landers.
That's correct.
So if we turn our attention to page 4 here, a lot of these details, again, Cassandra covered earlier. This is really just highlighting the various changes that were used to conduct our stress testing. So you'll see, the qualitative weightings changing and increasing for a couple of asset classes. You've seen the basis point ranges also decreasing for a few asset classes as well. So that sort of takes us through that stage. What we've shown on the following page is our estimate of how all of these changes would have affected the actual results that were achieved versus what these proposed changes would have done. So if we look, say, at the total fund, we see that back in 2011-12, when you take into account the private equity benchmark changes, the various changes to global equity, that type of thing, the actual result, of course, there was no payout under the plan, and you actually missed the benchmark by about 109 basis points. We see that under the proposed changes, you actually would have beat the benchmark by about 36 basis points, which means that people would have gotten 90% of their maximum incentive for that portion, that total fund portion. We'll see that in 2012, 2013. Also, you would have seen a slight payout under the incentive plan for that versus what actually was paid out. And then we see that in the last year, you would have had no difference. There still wouldn't have been a payout attained under even the proposed formula. So right there, you're seeing a significant difference that these proposed changes would have made on payouts historically. Private equity, like Mr. Aylman had mentioned earlier, in 2012, 2013, and 2013-14, you see the big difference that the change in the benchmark as well as the excess return range has on what the score would have been, which would have led to a payout. So almost a full maximum payout in 2012-13, and then last year they actually would have received a full maximum payout with the changes to the benchmark and to the excess return range. So private equity, a big difference between what actually occurred and what would have occurred with these new changes. The active portfolio in terms of global equity, you see basically in 2011-12, you see the difference that moving from the 0 to 90 basis point range has, and when you go to the 0 to 60 range. So instead of getting 75% of the maximum payout in 2011-12, they would have received a maximum payout under that performance. And then you see no change for the last 2 years because they did not beat the benchmark. Consequently, of course, again, with the change in the performance of the active global equities, as well as that change between the weightings, 67-33, to the actual weightings, which are more 40-60 split, you see that changes the score for global equity performance so that, in the last 3 years, you would have again seen an increased payout in all 3 years. And then to Mr. Unterman's point, the CIO and historically innovation and risk, we understand that going forward, they'll be measured on a specific benchmark index, but historically they were also measured against this average of the 5 asset classes, you see the effect that, some of these changes in terms of the private equity, global equity would have had on the score for the CIO and individuals in that rating. So, and then the last one being the deputy CIO, who recently in 2013-14 had their performance measured against just the 3 public asset classes. So that being, I believe, global equity, fixed income, as well as I believe it's real estate, but I might be off on that 3rd public asset class. But you see again the impact that some of these changes would have had. Her score would have increased by about 10%. So overall, historically, and lastly, the corporate governance, there was a proposed change in terms of the 0-90 to 0-60. It actually wouldn't have mattered. In each of the 3 years, they would have had the exact same score or performance score. So we didn't want to duplicate efforts by including it in the table, but essentially there would have been no change over the last 3 years in that specific asset class. And then what we wanted to show on the next page. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Ms. Dillon has a question.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Right here, Ms. Dillon.
If we could go back to the last slide, please. So within your write-up, on your page 7 and Comp 102, you have a note, and in the note you talk about that you're typically asked to conduct analysis on any incentive criteria changes, such as new benchmark indices and new excess return ranges, as part of a comprehensive incentive review process. We've not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm looking at is, that's not what we asked you to do. What we asked you to do is do the backward and the forward. So in light of us asking you to do the backward and forward, going back to the benchmark slide, and you don't have to go back that far, but we have proposed changes in our benchmarks, but we did do changes already in private equity.
Correct.
And I have to say that this slide gives me pause that our private equity went from 0 to their max with the benchmark change that we made. And I know I'm putting you on the spot because you've not necessarily done an analysis of that, but do you have an opinion? I mean, are we off the mark on the benchmark?
So as part of our due diligence, we were provided with the thoughts of PCA as well as Makita. And what we saw was an analysis, and Cassandra might, or I believe they're both on the line or here in person, can speak to this, but we did see that there was a pretty good correlation between this new benchmark index and the returns that CalSTRS has been seeing over the last few years when we looked at that graphic. And when we looked at the old benchmark, there did tend to be less correlation and very large swings between the performance. So we can comment to that perspective that when looking at that graphic over the last few years, it did seem like there was more of a correlation between the new benchmark being proposed, or the new that was approved, and the private equity performance at CalSTRS. But we can't comment historically, like you said, on the last 10 years, how much would have hit.
I mean, we don't necessarily want the swings. We want our investors, or we want to try to get as close to our benchmark as we can. So then what it sounds like I'm hearing you saying that maybe it is more appropriate than what we had before.
Yeah, again, based on our limited, what we saw from some of the pension consultants who had done a lot of this work, there did seem to be a better correlation between the new benchmark index and the returns historically at CalSTRS, but we weren't asked to do as thorough a review as PCA or Makita would have.
All right, thank
And
you.
Dana, it might help. One of the reasons you're seeing such a big swing, that's a 1-year number, not the
Right.
3-year average.
Okay,
So that's the big difference, because you're going to still see that kind of deviation year to year. But the 3-year average, and we went back and looked, they just barely have a positive against the new benchmark if you used it for all 3 years.
well, then that makes me want to ask if what we're actually basing our incentive payouts on is the 3-year average. Why is these numbers not the 3-year average? Why are they just a single-year average?
That's an excellent
Look at you, Dana.
Excellent question.
I'm rocking calm today.
Good question. I like it. I think that's a good question.
This was, I guess, maybe there was some confusion. This was our understanding. We thought this was the 3-year returns, and that's what we had inserted in. But if there was some miscommunication or lack of understanding, we're happy to review how that would have
So why don't we
changed
do this,
differently.
why
But
don't we put it as an information request, it comes back to the committee, what this document would look like if we used the 3 years.
I think, Mr. Chairman,
All righty, thank you.
I think, Mr. Chairman, we'd like to go back and look at the larger 10-year period for you. I think that would be
That'd be
I was
helpful.
just gonna ask that. if we
Because
could-
I think the reason we didn't, we had this data, but I think the 10-year piece gives you a better puzzle, and it would also answer the other question, which I think was floating around, was, had to do with the performance measure. So I think the longer picture, because you want to create an incentive plan that frankly doesn't play out 100% of the time every year. So you don't want to, unless it was an extraordinary, never seen it happen anywhere in any industry, you wouldn't expect people to get 100% 10 years in a row, nor would you expect them to have what you've had lately, which is nothing or very low payout for a long period of time. So I think we'd want to look at that question to help you.
Thank you.
All right, Dana.
Kind of shocking myself.
Anything else, Mr. Landis? Do you have another slide or?
I was just going to quickly just show the graphics, which depending on, once we clarify exactly the results there, may change these numbers. But essentially, what we're trying to show in the graphic on the following page to these proposed results is just the difference cumulatively on what the payouts would have been over the last 3 years with the actual results versus what the proposed new changes would have received. And you'll see that, for private equity, there would have been a larger gap, again, due to, as we mentioned there, the couple of years where they would have had close to max performance, as well as each of these different asset classes is also affected by total fund results. So the total fund results over the 3 years, because those improved and led to a higher score on the incentive scale, that would have also led to these increased payouts for each of these different asset classes in the last 3 years. So just wanted to highlight those specifically.
And maybe this is an informational request too, but thought what might be helpful here is can we get, obviously for the CEO and the CIO, we're talking about kind of one person year, but can we, with the asset class categories, kind of convert that into person years and give us that information?
Sorry, you're asking like line by line each person in those areas? Is that what you're?
Well, I just kind of the number of person years associated with each of the
Oh, the
asset
number
class
of
categories.
people. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. We can definitely add that information in because, yeah, all of these numbers were generated from the individuals in each of those areas, so we can definitely add that information.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Landis, back to you. Is there anything else?
And then the last one, on the last couple of pages, is just the forward stress testing. So looking forward over the next 3 years under some different performance scenarios, we wanted to look at the changes in two ways. So one being the changes in those to innovation and risk, and as well to corporate governance in the qualitative weighting. So that increase in the qualitative rating, moving away a little bit less on the asset class performance. And we note that when you look at specifically those changes, you see that, it makes very little impact cumulatively on the total payouts. And then, again, that goes back to Ms. Yee's point. There's a very few amount of people that are actually impacted by those weighting changes. So ultimately, it doesn't affect the total payouts too much, only in the case that when there's high investment performance and lower qualitative performance than that, you'll tend to see slightly lower payouts under the proposed new scheme. And consequently, when there's higher investment performance, when there's lower investment performance and higher qualitative performance, you'll see a slight increase in what would be paid out under the new proposed changes. And then the last graphic, just to highlight and summarize, is when we look specifically at and isolate the changes in the excess return scales and that slight change to the weighting in the active and passive investments in global equity, we wanted to examine what would the payout impact be on a cumulative basis. And again, you'll see under all of these scenarios, our analysis is showing that it would lead to an increase in payouts, and that can be, again, largely attributed to the fact that at lower excess return scales, so going to that 0 to 60 or that 0 to 40 basis points, you're now getting a maximum payout at, say, 40 basis points for total fund, where historically or under the current scheme, you'd only be getting a maximum payout at 60 basis points. So that would tend to explain why the levels tend to increase under the proposed new changes. So that was all we wanted to quickly go through to summarize. There's obviously a lot of detail in the report that you have on you, and happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Landers. Any other further questions or clarifying points?
Mr. Chairman, just one point, that as consultants, there's great pressure to be experts, and I appreciate the good questioning of your board. Having said that, these are ex-ante projections, and they look very scientific, and they've got a lot of numbers behind them and a lot of analysis, but you know as a board, it's ex-ante. So you're looking at past views. I think to Ms. Dillon's comment, the looking at the 3-year picture would be helpful, but it will be polluted by more assumptions. So you're still going to have a similar challenge before you. Will the new system work into the future? And we'd be happy to help with that discussion.
Very much appreciate that. There is a fourth component to this information item, and being mindful of the time, we're on the fourth point. Thanks, Cassandra.
So, on the last page on the right, there's a list of proposed changes in the policy that are primarily technical, housekeeping or cleanup in nature. I'm just going to go over the 3 pieces that do have some substantive impact. One is the removing of the 10% restriction to adjust the CEO and CIO salary within the approved salary range. Most of the board members, I think, have participated in the salary adjustments this last couple of years. And when, just a little over 18 months ago, when we established the new salary ranges for all of the statutory positions under the board's authority, this new salary ranges, since they hadn't been adjusted in years, put a lot of the staff underneath the minimum salary range. But the policy parameters limited the amount that the board could adjust salaries, which kept our CEO and CIO below the minimum for several years. So the board had expressed a desire to make that change, and so we've included that in the draft proposal to remove that limitation, but still give the board discretion to move the salaries within the approved salary range that you establish based on the policy parameters. The second piece is permitting an award payout to employees who voluntarily separate. This and the paying awards upon appointment were all incorporated under a section in the policy entitled Pro Rata Awards, and really was trying to address a number of different things that didn't really belong under Pro Rata Awards, so we separated it and have a section now that is payout of incentives upon separation and payout of incentives upon appointment. And in some of those situations, there might be a pro rata application dependent upon the criteria that are described in the policy. So in this situation, it is specifically addressing when somebody has completed the plan year, and it leaves after the plan year is completed. The policy currently prohibits the payout of the award unless they're here when the check is actually issued. And we would like to be able to pay out the award if they've completed the plan year based on the performance of the asset class, performance that they have performed to, and their personal performance. So that's one change. And then the third change is modifying the recruitment pay differential to allow the payment to state staff who are currently incentive eligible. And this speaks specifically to the direct example is if we are recruiting staff that might be from another fund, and they are prohibited, they would possibly be losing a bonus if we are in the middle of a plan year. They would be forfeiting a bonus and then coming into our system with a graded in bonus, likely at a lower level than what they would be leaving, which really is a disadvantage for coming into CalSTRS. So we would like to be competitive and be able to offset a loss of bonus with a recruitment differential, which is what we use it for outside of the state. So within the state, it limits our ability to do that because of that restriction. Those were the three things I wanted to address.
Terrific, Cassandra. Any questions on those 3 points? Ms. Ortega?
Yeah, a couple questions. So the removal of the 10% cap, it's not, the cap would be completely gone for all discussion of salary increases. It's not just when there's an adjustment due to a salary survey or people being under the minimum, right? So it's just, in any year, the board has authority to provide a raise higher than, without a cap of any amount, right?
Well, the cap that would be in place would be the maximum of that salary range, because the salary range you do establish based on
Right.
the peer group that we base it on.
Okay, and then, I don't think you talked about this, but the new language, adding the discussion of the 0 to 10% for the staff, not the CEO and CIO. So I just wondered if you could talk about why sort of adding a cap for I mean, it's not a hard cap because it says that there's discretion still, but why add that in for those folks?
We didn't add it, we changed it. The cap used to be 12.5% without discretion up to the midpoint of the range. So what we did was reduce it to 10% to allow for some sort of expectation on what the staff can look to for salary movements within a prescribed plan year, with the ability to have discretion applied relative to where they've come in. If it's a new staff person, where other staff are relative to the pay scales. So.
And then on the incentive award for individuals who voluntarily separate, being able to pay that after they've separated, is that an investment industry practice? It seems unusual to me to pay someone an incentive after they're no longer employed.
I'm not sure if it's an industry practice. The intent, I can tell you, when that language was applied to the policy, was it was almost a handcuffing language. It was a retention strategy, so that if you're not here when we pay the award out, then you're going to lose your entire plant bonus. But it takes us 3 to 4 months after the plan year to get through the process to pay the bonuses. So we don't want people to necessarily stay 4 months longer than what they want to just to get that bonus payment if they've completed the plan year and performed and provided some positive return to the system.
They're not retiring or, so I just, maybe it's a good retention strategy, I don't know. And then my last question is on the what do you call it? The differential, the out of state. So is there a separate policy for recruiting out of state folks that has to do with like moving expenses and kind of, do you have a separate policy that you look to being able to offer someone moving assistance? So this is like not because out of state implies that it's an issue of them moving from out of state, right?
Well, yes, we do have there is a relocation expense policy that reimburses expenses to move to come and work at CalSTRS, and that's based on actual expenses, and there's parameters surrounding that. That's not what this is discussing. This is discussing recruitment for those who are out of state, that are not currently in state service, not out of the state of California. And we had the same discussion because it was confusing. But the reason why it's a little bit more clear is because the actual pay differential defines it as specifically only those who are not working for the state of California. That's what the intent is. So it doesn't have anything to do with if you work in California or not. Because if we were recruiting somebody from, San Diego County, for instance, and they were going to lose a bonus, we would want to be able to exercise our recruitment bonus or recruitment differential to offset their loss, to get them into the system.
Any other questions or comments?
Ms. Dillon?
So this is for first reading, the policy? Yes. Then I'll speak to you offline.
Okay, thank you, Dana.
You're welcome.
So seeing no other questions or comments, see if I can summarize this. This is going to come back to us in June. The four aspects of the presentation today by staff and the consultants. The first is the streamlining of the policy and the administrative implementation to two different documents. Second item had to do with the basis points used for a bonus or incentives, and looking at maybe the threshold has actually been too high, that we actually held our, and we have some data that shows that our performance has been at times very good, but our staff hasn't been eligible for incentives because the threshold of 60 basis points has been too high, and looking at bringing it down to 50 basis points, if that was correct. The third item, the big issues, there were a couple of issues that were raised, but the biggest one had to do with the whole question of the 10% towards sustainability for the CEO's, part of the CEO incentive, and that whole dialogue and conversation we had around that, which was so rich and so good. Some thoughts around that. Then Mr. Unterman's question, which will lead to a conversation next year about relative versus absolute, which will be on the agenda of work plan. And then finally, the fourth aspect of this presentation that Cassandra's just laid out, the cap for the CEO, CIO that we currently have, and adjusting the other one from 12.5% down to 10. And there was a third aspect, but that pretty much summarizes all of those items that came before us today for information. We'll be taking and come back in June for some action. So just in some closing, incentive is a difficult conversation to get right, and policy to get right. We've done a lot, and we take it quite seriously. It's interesting to have this conversation from a teacher's perspective and background. You know, we talk about how you adequately compensate a teacher. What is a great teacher really worth? You know, how do you quantify what, and we haven't got into the conversation, but there's so much more to attracting and retaining great talent aside from pay. The reality is there's a lot of people who would want to make a lot of money working in our system, but we don't want them working here because we want people who also value public service. We also want people who want to be part of a team and understand a culture. Our governor talks about psychic pay. I don't know if I'm quite there yet. I still have bills to pay and things like that, but psychic satisfaction in work that we do. But all kidding aside, I think we should be proud of, as a committee, about how we've continued to wrestle with this issue to try to get it right, to balance the right compensation with the people and skill sets, etc. And we're fortunate to have folks from outside advise us and bring us data, and we're deliberate about the decisions we make. And I think the evidence is quite true, quite clear, that in the private sector, I've learned that pay for performance, you don't always get what you pay for. Many corporations overpay executives who underdeliver, and some of the best executives are underpaid, based upon what I've read in research and what experts in the field have said. So pay for performance is not all what it's cracked out to be. Yep. But we're trying to get it right. So thanks to the staff and the consultants who brought this forward, and we look forward to taking some action in June. Thank you very much. Okay, so it brings us to our next item, which is item 4. And Cassandra, this is you as well.
This is bringing back the incentive opportunity proposal for the associate portfolio manager classification, which the board has approved, and it has been moved forward to CalHR, but it has not moved beyond CalHR, so they still have not approved it. It has not gone to the State Personnel Board for adoption, but it is still under consideration at at the CalHR organization. What we had asked McLaughlin to provide the last time they were here was the incentive recommendation in preparation for the classification being approved. And upon that presentation, we had had a request from the committee to consider and provide what a graded in concept would look like relative to the 40%. So this item just goes over what that would look like in the difference between the IO3 at the 15%, the 40% at the associate portfolio manager, and then the graded in of the portfolio manager, and the comparisons of those classifications. So the action by the board is to whether or not you want to adopt an incentive for this associate portfolio manager position, and if so, would you like to adopt the 40% or a graded in based on this or any other variance thereof?
Yes, a comment and a question, and so I will say that I support the graded in approach since I'm the one who asked for you to bring it back, and so thank you for doing the work and for bringing it back. I think that this makes more sense, as I stated last time. The question I had is related to, I can't even remember when we started this conversation, but when we first talked about this position, one of the points of one of the arguments for establishing that position was that CalPERS was planning to establish a similar position, and there would be some concern about, if they had this associate position and we did not. And so I wondered if you knew the status of their attempt, because I think if I recall, they were kind of ahead of us in getting the request into CalHR.
They're having the same struggles that we are, and we do talk to CalPERS a lot on our classifications and try to, stay in tune with what they're doing. They had the proposal over there, they were ahead of us, and then they pulled it back, and then they were seeing what was going to happen with ours, and they may resubmit it or it still might be active, but we're in the same place with where they are. If CalHR approves our associate portfolio manager, they will be doing it at the same time as giving approval to CalPERS for their classification. It's named differently over there. I think it's a junior or something like that.
What happens if we were going to establish these positions as temporary positions while we went through this process? So what happens if CalHR does not approve it?
If CalHR does not approve it, I don't think that we've made any temporary appointments. We did reduce the salary range in anticipation of doing some temporary appointments. The strategy, and we've talked to CalHR about this, if they don't approve it, then what we may do is look at our current portfolio manager classification and add, and maybe just broadband that and have those responsibilities within A, B, and C ranges, something similar to that. But we've talked to them about it, and they've advised us to wait until a definitive decision is completed, and then we would know which way to go with regard to that. The salary range that we reduced allows for that, so that's the good thing. We got part of the process done, and that's already been in place. And I think that CalPERS would probably look at what we're doing to see if maybe that's the direction they should go as well. The whole, as you know, their look at it is, why are we adding another classification when we're trying to consolidate classifications? But we also are trying to meet a business need, and these classifications are under the board's governance through the education code. So there's a distinct authority difference on who's responsible for the establishment of the positions and how that works through the process.
Mr. Unterman?
This is just a question of process, really. In settings away from public agencies, a board would really only consider the compensation of the top 2 or 3 officers, and I think in our setting, only these 2. And while it may be very interesting that Chris and Jack have decided they wanted to create this category and they're working through the CalHR aspects of it, a lot of boards wouldn't spend time on it, saying, however you're getting your team compensated, as long as you're producing the appropriate results, that's great. So is there something as a matter of public policy that says we should be examining and setting specific criteria for the different portfolio managers?
Sandra, would you like to
Yeah,
comment on that?
the direct authority comes through the education code. So it is the education code that drives, that sets the authority or gives the authority to the board to set the salaries of those positions that are included in that education code, and they're listed out. And it's it's the CEO, CIO, general counsel, system actuary, and investment positions, which we have a number of them. So it's giving you the authority to set salaries aside from the state governance
And what
process.
if we said we want to delegate our authority to Jack and Chris with respect to investment
Under
professionals?
the education code, you can delegate any of your responsibilities.
That's another pretty significant suggestion coming from Mr. Unterman, which I think would be important for us to consider on a work plan for 15, 16. It's
I mean, I think that would be something really worth considering.
exploring, absolutely. So why don't we put that out there as well? Because we have looked at delegated authority for other aspects of our CEO and CIO, but this would just be a different.
Well, we delegate the authority to make investments up to $1 billion. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah,
we ought to be able.
yeah. Okay, so we'll put that on the work plan. And I think our CEO's delegated authorities pretty, it's meaningful as well. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Mr.
On
Wood.
that last point, yeah, clearly we could delegate that authority, but I think historically the board has kind of set the parameters, and then in terms of, like, we don't do the evaluations that determine incentive comp, or we don't figure out within the ranges where, like, a new incumbent should be, or the base salary adjustments. We get that reported afterwards. And I think, well, I don't want to speak for all the constitutional offices, but those of us who have our eye on the civil service state workforce as a whole, we like to, I mean, I know the treasurer as a board member would like to be able to continue to set those parameters to, I mean, you know, to sort of control a little bit where, to set the policy and set the boundaries.
Sure, well, that's why I asked the question, but I do think it's worth debating
Sure.
and considering, because you can set kind of pool as a whole parameters as opposed to innovation fund. We're making up some index that applies to you. We'll never quite understand what we approve, but Chris and Jack think it makes sense. Or global equity, we've covered, you know, we're measuring how well you did by the benchmark, and then how you've chosen your managers. We've got some formula that may or may not be apt in a given year or a given portfolio mix, and and where they can, you know, fine tune it a little better and a little bit more precisely year by year.
No, in general, I always agree, if you can keep the board out of the weeds, that's best. So, thanks.
all right, terrific. So we have that, a second placeholder. We'll make a decision in July, but those certainly are setting the stage a little bit for two good discussions for this committee for the 15-16 work year. Ms. Ortega, the staff is looking for some direction relative for us to take action in June on this specific item, and Ms. Ortega's expressed her preference on a graded-in approach. I didn't hear any opposition to that, and if there is none, then that's the direction we're going to be giving you. Okay? Is there any? Ms. Ortega?
Is this eligible to be taken up today?
I believe it can be. Is there any reason why we can't take action on this specific aspect of this item? Can we take action on it today?
Brian?
Ryan, Mr. Bartow?
Yes.
We can.
You can.
I would move approval. I mean, we've already discussed it twice now.
Very good.
Second.
In respect of Tom's comments as well,
Very good.
why not close this item?
Terrific. So Ms. Ortega has moved and Dana Dillon has seconded that we adopt a graded-in approach. So any further discussion? All those on the committee in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes as an action item. Okay. Sure, go ahead, Mr. Elman.
So it's obviously too late, you passed it. Obviously, my recommendation was going to be against it. The one flag I'd like to plant, very seriously though, is if PERS does adopt this and they do not do a graded in, we are at a huge competitive disadvantage to PERS. So to an IO3 at PERS, we will not be able to recruit them. And we've had a recruitment recently where we did lose a CalPERS person because our incentive was graded in and they would have fallen back. So I understand the reason for the graded in, but just understand the dynamics, the ramifications of us doing that compared to just, a mile away.
Ms. Ortega.
Sure, I was just gonna say, since I don't sit on the PERS board, maybe that's a good reason for them to have pulled it back and let us go first, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure we could win here. If they follow us and what we set, then they're able to do it in a way that's more advantageous to their recruitment than ours, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Just so you know, they don't use where we use the graded in, they don't use that. They start people at the max right away. So that's an existing disadvantage in the portfolio manager series. And that's my concern, is we just submitted it for the associate portfolio manager series.
If we are successful at modifying the recruitment differential, we may be able to offset any losses that come up. I don't know if that's a huge thing that occurs that often. It's been a couple of situations that might have occurred, but I think that we might be able to.
Yeah, to give you some background, prior to last year, almost never occurred, because our salaries, as you know, were a full notch below CalPERS. Now you took the step to get in their range. I've been thrilled. It's the first time we've actually had their portfolio managers looking at us seriously. And our concern with this associate portfolio manager series is this is the bulk of your, majority of your investment staff are investment officer 3s. Same thing over there. It's the same position, same pay, same 15% incentive. And that's why we're both keen to create this. This is definitely, to put in literal terms, your later millennials or your later Gen X's and your millennials coming up into the senior positions. I just don't want to be at a competitive disadvantage of bringing those people over here, especially because they're only us and PERS and State Street Bank, other than treasurer and controllers, small staff, but really it's the three of us that are the main investment offices in investment industry in Sacramento. So they're a key recruiting area. You don't tend to pull IO3s into this from Oregon or Arizona. So.
Yeah, I'm going to speak not as a board member, so completely as a representative of the Department of Finance. It is not good for the state or for the public funds that are paying for the benefits to have this kind of escalation back and forth across the river, I think. So I challenge us all to think about a way of handling compensation and recruitment strategies in a way that is good for all the taxpayers in the state and not just, so I realize as a board, we have to think differently about what's good for our duty and our system, and I recognize that difference, but I felt like I needed to say that as a Department of Finance.
Well said, and that's, I think, a good way for us to close this item. Just in speaking to some folks about fiduciary duty the last couple of months, I think some fiduciary attorneys and experts would present to us very compelling evidence that our duty starts here, but it may not necessarily end at this dais relative to our overall responsibility. And these are pretty smart and established people who are really pushing the envelope on board responsibilities and duties. So maybe it's not so much of a stretch to say it's beyond what we should be talking about. So thank you very much. It's good. Information requests, do we have, Carolyn, do we have?
We do.
Brian, Mr. Bartu?
I think
Brian? We have them, right?
Yeah.
We're
I
good.
mean, there were quite a few. I think the only one I would add was, I think Controller Yee asked for person years on some of the data. I think that just wasn't in your laundry list.
Can you say it again, Brian? I couldn't understand you. Can you say it one more time?
I'm sorry, the only thing that was missing from that list was Controller Yee had asked for information on the person years on the performance data, on the incentive data. I think you captured everything else on your list.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Bartu.
When you did your summary, you included that we'll get the information from GGA next year, the research what they're doing? The
Yes.
research that you're doing, conducting next year about the idea of like a database or it will be, get that. I just would like that on the record, that will be.
I think it will take some months to get, but we'll share
I'll
it.
be chomping at the bit.
I think there'll be a few people. I'm curious. I don't know what the answer is in advance.
Very good. Item 6 is the draft agenda for the next committee. You can read that. It's set for June. We're not meeting as a committee in April. It's essentially adopting and taking action on a lot of the items we discussed today. So that will be in June. Item 6A is opportunities for statements from the public. Does anyone from the public wish to address the committee? Thank you very much. We're going to adjourn out of open session, and we're going to take a 7-minute break. We'll start at 4:45 in closed session. 4:45 in the back, in the caucus room.
Oh, we're gonna meet back there, okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stanway, Mr. Landers.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you, Ms.
much.
McDuffie. Thank you.